In the spring of 1871, something evil arrived in southeastern Kansas that would challenge everything historians thought they knew about the American frontier. What happened along the Osage Trail over the next 2 years created one of the most disturbing serial murder cases in American history, a case so shocking that authorities sealed a record for decades, and the truth about Kate Bender became the subject of the most haunting mystery ever documented on the Great Plains. The official records show 21 confirmed victims. But what they don't tell you is how a 23-year-old woman with piercing blue eyes and an otherworldly presence turned a simple prairie into America's first documented murder hotel. This channel is only for those courageous enough to confront the darkest chapters of our past, because what you're about to discover will shatter every romantic notion you've ever held about frontier hospitality. Kate Bender didn't just kill her victims. She weaponized their deepest spiritual beliefs against them, turning their faith into the very instrument of their destruction. And when she vanished into the vast American wilderness, she left behind a mystery that continues to haunt the Kansas plains to this day. The year was 1871, and the American frontier was still a lawless expanse where desperate families could reinvent themselves far from the prying eyes of civilization. It was into this wild landscape that the Bender family arrived, John Bender Sr., his wife Elvira, their son John Jr., and the enigmatic Kate Bender, who would become the most feared woman in Kansas history. They established what appeared to be a modest roadside and along the heavily traveled Osage Trail, a crucial north-south route that connected Kansas to the Indian Territory. The single-story cabin served as both home and business, offering weary travelers a hot meal, a bed for the night, and something far more unusual, the spiritual services of Kate Bender, who advertised herself as a gifted medium capable of communicating with the dead. Kate was unlike any frontier woman the locals had ever encountered. Standing nearly 6 feet tall with striking features and an intense gaze that seemed to pierce straight through a person's soul, she commanded attention wherever she went. Her English was heavily accented. Some said German. Others claimed it was Dutch, but her voice carried an hypnotic quality that drew people in like moths to a flame. What made Kate truly dangerous wasn't just her physical presence, but her psychological sophistication. In an era when spiritualism was sweeping across America, when grieving families desperately sought contact with loved ones lost to war and disease, Kate positioned herself as a bridge between the world of the living and the dead. She distributed handmade flyers throughout Labette County, proclaiming her abilities in bold, confident language that promised answers to life's greatest mysteries. But Kate Bender was no ordinary frontier spiritualist. She was a predator who had discovered the perfect hunting ground. The first disappearance occurred just 3 months after the Benders opened their inn. George Lonscher, a German immigrant traveling south with nearly $300 in gold coins, stopped at the Bender place on a rainy October evening in 1871. Witnesses saw him enter the cabin just after sunset. He was never seen alive again. When Lonscher failed to arrive at his destination, his brother William began asking questions along the Osage Trail. Everyone remembered the tall, quiet German man, and several people recalled seeing him enter the Bender Inn. But when William confronted the family, they claimed ignorance. Kate, speaking with her strange accent and unsettling stare, told him that her spiritual guide sensed his brother had met with misfortune further south, probably at the hands of hostile Indians. What William Lonscher didn't know, what no one knew, was that at that very moment, George's body lay buried in the vegetable garden behind the Bender cabin, his skull crushed by a hammer blow that had been delivered with surgical precision through a canvas curtain that divided the inn's main room. This was the Bender method, and it was diabolically simple. The single-room cabin was divided by a heavy canvas cloth that created 2 separate areas, a public dining space where travelers could eat and rest, and a private area where the family lived. Guests were always seated at a specific table with their backs to the canvas divider, directly above a trapdoor that led to the cabin cellar. Kate would engage the victims in conversation, often offering to perform a seance or provide spiritual guidance. While the unsuspecting travelers sat relaxed and distracted, John Bender Sr. would position himself behind the canvas with a heavy claw hammer. At Kate's signal, usually a seemingly innocent comment about the weather or a question about the guest's destination, the hammer would come crashing down to the canvas, striking the victim's skull with enough force to kill instantly. But the Benders weren't content with simple murder. They had turned killing into an art form, a carefully choreographed dance of deception and death that allowed them to extract maximum profit from each victim while minimizing their risk of discovery. As 1871 turned to 1872, the disappearances became impossible to ignore. The Osage Trail, once considered relatively safe, began to develop a sinister reputation. Travelers started avoiding the route altogether, preferring to take longer, more circuitous paths to their destinations. Local newspapers began reporting on the mysterious vanishings, and territorial authorities launched their first investigation. But Kate Bender was always one step ahead. She had an almost supernatural ability to sense danger, and she used her reputation as a spiritualist to deflect suspicion. When questioned by law enforcement, she would claim that her spiritual guides had revealed disturbing visions about the missing men, visions that always pointed investigators away from the Bender property and toward other potential suspects. What made Kate's deception so effective was her genuine understanding of human psychology. She knew that people wanted to believe in something greater than themselves, especially on a harsh frontier where death was a constant companion. She exploited this desperate need for spiritual connection, turning it into a weapon more deadly than any gun or knife. The winter of 1872 brought no relief from the terror. If anything, the Benders became bolder and more systematic in their approach. They began targeting specific types of victims. Single men traveling with significant amounts of money, families with valuable possessions, anyone who looked like they wouldn't be immediately missed. Kate developed an elaborate system for identifying the most profitable targets. During her advertised seances, she would extract detailed information about her clients' financial situations, their destinations, and their travel plans. She had an uncanny ability to make people trust her, to share their deepest secrets and fears. And then she would use that information to determine whether they were worth killing. The most horrifying discovery came to light decades later, when historians finally gained access to the sealed case files. Among the Benders' victims was 8-year-old Mary Ann Lawnshare, George's niece, who had been traveling with her father when they stopped at the inn. The evidence suggested that the child had been buried alive, probably to muffle her screams while the family murdered her father at the table above. This revelation changed everything historians thought they knew about the case. Kate Bender wasn't just an opportunistic killer. She was a monster capable of unimaginable cruelty, someone who could look into a child's terrified eyes and choose to bury her alive rather than grant her a quick death. By early 1873, the Benders had refined their operation to murderous perfection. They had killed at least 21 people, possibly more, and accumulated a small fortune in stolen money and goods. Kate had become a local celebrity, known throughout southeastern Kansas as a gifted spiritualist who could commune with the dead and predict the future. But Kate's greatest prediction, that their murderous enterprise would soon come to an end, was about to prove frighteningly accurate. The beginning of the end came in March 1873, when Dr. William York, a well-respected physician from Independence, Kansas, failed to return from a trip to Iowa. York was no ordinary traveler. He was a brother of a powerful state senator, and his disappearance triggered a massive search effort that would ultimately expose the Bender family's horrific crimes. Senator Alexander York was not a man to be trifled with. When local authorities proved unable to locate his missing brother, he organized his own search party and began systematically investigating every farm and settlement along the Osage Trail. The search party included some of the most influential men in Kansas, and they had the resources and determination to dig deeper than any previous investigation. When Senator York's group arrived at the Bender Inn on April 3, 1873, they found Kate at her most charming and persuasive. She welcomed the searchers warmly, offered them food and drink, and even volunteered to conduct a seance to help locate the missing doctor. Her performance was flawless. She appeared genuinely concerned about Dr. York's fate and eager to help in any way possible. But Senator York was no ordinary frontier settler susceptible to Kate's psychological manipulation. He was an educated, sophisticated man who had spent years dealing with criminals and confidence artists in the political arena. Something about Kate's overly helpful demeanor raised his suspicions, and he made a mental note to return to the Bender property for a more thorough investigation. Kate's supernatural intuition told her that the game was up. Within hours of the search party's departure, She began making preparations for the family's escape. They would have to abandon everything they had built, all the wealth they had accumulated, and disappear into the vast American wilderness before the authorities could return. What happened next has never been fully explained, but the evidence suggests that Kate orchestrated one of the most successful criminal disappearances in American history. On the night of April 3rd, 1873, the Bender family simply vanished. When Senator York's search party returned to the inn 5 days later, they found the property completely abandoned. The livestock had been turned loose, personal belongings were scattered throughout the cabin, and there was no sign of where the family had gone. But the searchers' investigation of the abandoned property would reveal horrors that exceeded their worst nightmares. In the vegetable garden behind the cabin, they discovered a series of shallow graves containing the decomposed remains of at least 11 victims. The bodies showed evidence of brutal trauma, crushed skulls, throat wounds, and in some cases, signs that the victims had been tortured before death. The discovery of little Mary Ann Launcher's body was particularly disturbing. The 8-year-old had been found in a grave separate from her father, and the condition of her remains suggested she had been alive when she was buried. Even hardened frontier lawmen were reduced to tears by the sight of the child's tiny skeleton, her small hand still positioned as if she had been trying to claw her way out of the earth. But perhaps the most chilling discovery was found inside the cabin itself. Behind the canvas curtain, investigators found a collection of personal items that had belonged to the victims: watches, jewelry, clothing, and photographs. Kate had kept trophies from each murder, carefully cataloging and preserving mementos of her crimes like some macabre museum curator. The manhunt that followed was one of the largest in American history up to that point. Reward posters were distributed throughout Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Texas, offering $3,000 for information leading to the capture of the Bender family. It was an enormous sum for time, equivalent to nearly $70,000 in today's money. Dozens of sightings were reported over the following years. Kate Bender was supposedly spotted in Texas, California, New Mexico, and even as far away as New York. Every few months, newspapers would report that the infamous spiritualist had been captured, only to later retract the story when the arrested woman proved to be someone else entirely. But Kate Bender had vanished as completely as if she had used her alleged supernatural powers to disappear from the physical world. No credible trace of her or her family was ever found, despite decades of searching by law enforcement and bounty hunters. The mystery of Kate Bender's escape has fascinated historians and criminologists for over a century. How did a family of 4, traveling with stolen goods and limited resources, manage to disappear so completely in an era when communication networks were rapidly expanding and law enforcement agencies were becoming increasingly sophisticated? Some experts believe the Benders have been planning their escape for months, possibly years. Kate's extensive knowledge of spiritualism and the occult may have connected her to underground networks of criminals and con artists who could provide assistance and false identities. The frontier's vast, sparsely populated territories offered countless places to hide, and the family's experience with deception would serve them well in creating new lives under assumed names. Others theorize that the Benders never escaped at all, that they were captured and killed by vigilantes who preferred frontier justice to the uncertainties of the legal system. In the lawless atmosphere of 1870s Kansas, it wouldn't have been unusual for a lynch mob to exact immediate punishment and then keep quiet about their actions. If this theory is correct, Kate Bender's body may be buried in an unmarked grave somewhere on a Kansas prairie. But the most disturbing possibility is that Kate Bender continued killing. Serial murderers rarely stop voluntarily, and someone with her skills and psychological makeup would have found it almost impossible to suppress her homicidal urges. If she succeeded in creating a new identity, she may have resumed her deadly career in another location, possibly claiming dozens of additional victims whose deaths were never connected to the infamous Kansas spiritualist. Recent advances in forensic archaeology and DNA analysis have renewed interest in the Bender case. Researchers have identified several unsolved murder cases from the late 1870s and 1880s that bear striking similarities to the Bender family's methods. A series of mysterious disappearances along stagecoach routes in Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona show patterns that are remarkably consistent with Kate's approach to victim selection and murder. In 2019, forensic investigators used ground-penetrating radar, to search the original Bender property, hoping to locate additional graves that might have been missed during the 1873 investigation. While no new remains were discovered, the survey revealed evidence of extensive excavation activity in areas that had never been searched before, suggesting that the family's victim count may have been significantly higher than the 21 confirmed murders. The case files also contain evidence that was never released to public. Witness statements describing Kate's behavior that go far beyond simple greed or even sadism. Multiple sources describe her as someone who seemed to derive genuine pleasure from the psychological manipulation of her victims, someone who enjoyed the process of deception and betrayal almost as much as the killing itself. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a forensic psychologist who has studied the case extensively, believes Kate Bender may have been one of America's first documented female psychopaths. Her analysis of contemporary accounts suggests someone with an almost supernatural ability to read and manipulate other people's emotions, combined with complete absence of empathy or remorse. What makes Kate's case particularly significant is how she used the social expectations of her era to her advantage. In the 1870s, women were presumed to be gentle, nurturing, and incapable of extreme violence. Kate exploited these assumptions brilliantly, using her gender as camouflage for her predatory nature. Even when suspicions began to focus on the Bender family, many investigators found it difficult to believe that a woman could be the architect of such systematic brutality. Today, the original Bender property is marked only by a small stone monument that few tourists ever visit. Local residents rarely speak about the case, and many newcomers to the area are unaware of the horrific events that occurred there over a century ago. But sometimes, especially on quiet winter nights when the Kansas wind howls across the prairie, locals report seeing strange lights near the old Bender site, flickering illumination that appears and disappears without explanation, as if someone were conducting seances for the restless spirits of the murdered. The truth about Kate Bender died with her, somewhere in the vast American wilderness. But her legacy lives on in the case files that document one of the most disturbing examples of serial murder in American history. She proved that evil could wear a beautiful face, that spiritual faith could be weaponized against the faithful, and that the frontier's promise of new beginnings could mask the darkest of intentions. More than 150 years after her disappearance, Kate Bender remains one of America's most wanted fugitives. The $3,000 reward was never claimed, and no evidence has ever conclusively proven her fate. She became a ghost story that refuses to die, a reminder that some mysteries are never meant to be solved. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of the Kate Bender case is what it reveals about the nature of evil itself. In an age when we tend to explain criminal behavior through psychology, sociology, or trauma, Kate Bender represents something more fundamental and terrifying. Pure malevolence that requires no explanation beyond its own existence. She walked among us once, charming and beautiful and utterly without conscience. And somewhere in the shadows of American history, in unmarked graves scattered across the frontier, lie the victims who trusted her with their lives and paid the ultimate price for that trust. The case remains officially unsolved. The mystery endures. And on quiet nights in southeastern Kansas, when the wind whispers across the prairie grass, some say you can still hear Kate Bender calling to the spirits of the dead, not to comfort them, but to add to their number. And don't miss our next video. Subscribe to the channel and enter the placelet, and follow other stories so intriguing and frightening like this. Click on the screen to watch it now.